Welcome, everyone, to this provocative and heartfelt podcast, Beyond Patriarchal Sex, a place for both women and men to elevate ourselves, finding out what it takes to live beyond our conditioning and assumptions, not only for ourselves, but also for the coming generations. My name is Dévashi Shakti, and you are warmly welcome to be part of these conversations. There really is so much to transmit in the Beyond Patriarchal Sex conversation because it touches a wide variety of places that many guests on the podcast have been speaking to. For me to communicate all that I have to say on why this project is here, what it's in service to, why it's happening now, what the main intended outcomes are, and more, it's actually way too much to say in just one episode. And I imagine it's also a lot to hear all at once. So I'm coming in now with these shorter solo episodes to say one main thing, hopefully at a time, to pace the sharing of my own ideas and contributions in the Beyond Patriarchal Sex conversation, and maybe to comment on what's been coming up from recent episodes as well. Firstly, I want to say that I've been actively teaching in the beyond space of the Beyond Patriarchal Sex equation, helping people discover their natural and innate embodied pathway to tantric sexuality for the majority of my life. And I love that work. So for me to add this additional project is something very intentional, because I won't be stopping my work that is about guiding people in how to reach expansive places of embodied love and pleasure and connection. But I also feel called to clearly name patriarchal sex for what it is as well. And to answer the question myself, what do I see is patriarchal sex? It is something that is assumed, it is allowed, it is endured, encouraged, and it's expected by men who have been taught that women's bodies are for them, and by women who've been taught to minimize their own experience to the extent that they don't even recognize how far they are going against themselves to be part of what is considered normal and what I am calling the patriarchal sex paradigm. It's just understood that that's what sex is for most people. That's how it happens, and that's all there is. To the extent that it's something uncomfortable for a woman to learn how to show up differently and more connected to herself and no longer following the patriarchal sex programming, it actually causes pretty huge adjustments to an existing relationship. And that's a big part of the work that I do with women who are in private or group immersions with me. And today, I want to go into the center of this beyond patriarchal sex theme by openly saying that while both women and men are part of creating this situation, patriarchal sex is the norm of how most humans on the planet have sex, and it's a form of normalized violence against women. I have felt my own hesitation in bringing this forward because I already know and can predict the reactions that come to a strong statement like this, and yet it's true. Women have been conditioned to accept slavery-like conditions when it comes to their sexuality. And now, for the first time in modern history, women are opting out. And of course, I'm not intending to reduce the obvious, overt sexual slavery conditions that women and girls across the world are living in. In fact, in naming the type of sex most people are having as a form of violence and slavery is part of why the illegal sex trade is also so normalized. I mean, the amount of men across the world engaging in also child sexual abuse, especially in tourism travel to developing countries, really, it's only a society that's already enabled milder forms of patriarchal sex that can allow for that to still be going on in 2025. Obviously, economic hardship is a big reason why those women and girls are there in those positions. But for the men that go and utilize them, they have no such excuse. It's outright exploitation. It's totally self-serving and another expression of patriarchal sex in an extreme way. We're living in a time where it's become a very common situation for women with education and some form of financial autonomy to no longer stay in marriages where the patriarchal sex paradigm has been left far too late to question. In many cases, it's already created the damage where the woman has had enough of being sexually used, her body perceived as an object of gratification, dehumanized, and approached with so much entitlement. And having said that, my work with women is very much about recovering her own sense of participation and responsibility within that. And still, most men have been part of this patriarchal sex paradigm too. They've gone along with it, taking from a woman's body without considering her experience. Of course, there are exceptions. I'm intentionally naming some widely socialized norms here. And the paradigm of patriarchal sex, by the way, does include women who might even argue that patriarchal sex suits them, because women have been so conditioned to devalue themselves and to have no idea what their bodies are capable of feeling. Women are so used to diminishing themselves and so in need of male approval in a lot of cases that she will argue to maintain her own slavery conditions, from being programmed to forget her own value, which is actually the deeper layer of this project when it comes to women, and a topic for another time. If you are a woman who wants to live beyond patriarchal sex, you're going to love the Tigress Path. It's primal feminine spirituality with deep somatic teachings and female embodiment practice. Currently, we have classes online and in person. There's the annual Tigress Bali retreat and more. So reach out on social media or go to thetigresspath.com for details. The thing is, in exposing patriarchal sex, naming it for what it is, it's truly not about looking for someone to blame. Like I've said in the beginning episodes, it's so far beyond that. And it is about naming the invisible, though. It is about naming that elephant in the room so that when it comes to women, she stops internalizing the whole thing and why it doesn't feel good for her as something wrong about her, which is really common. And when named in this way, calling it patriarchal sex, at least the women can see how widespread this actually is and how not personal to her as an individual it actually is as well. And naming patriarchal sex is a bit like naming that the slave labor industry exists, related to, let's say, the high-end fashioned brands. They're labels that if I said the names, you would know them. Everyone knows the names, and places these labels on a pedestal of prestige. But those labels, the owners of these companies, are complicit as perpetrators of instigating slave conditions for disadvantaged workers in developing countries and even some Western countries who are often paid something like $4 an hour for exceptionally long 12-hour shifts where people are forced to work themselves into the ground while the owners of those elite brands profit billions of US dollars each year. It's an unacceptable situation, and yet it continues. So when someone calls out that shadow of the fashion industry, no one assumes that that person is blaming the disadvantaged workers for trying to make ends meet. No one would think that. It's just understood that exposing the paradigm is actually in their favor. And the owners of the brands might be under pressure themselves from people higher up than them, making demands that they feel they have to fulfill to maintain what they have. They're still perpetrators of harm. And yet you can see how everyone has a role there and might maybe feeling pressure in some way in their own world. So, but in that slave labor industry of the fashion industry, the perpetrators of harm, is it possible that they could intend for both parties to thrive as a result of doing business together? Possible, for sure, but it's not a priority. Having a mutually beneficial outcome is not their intention because patriarchy in business, because someone has to be at the top and someone has to be disadvantaged the most. The consumers who fund the brand, by the way, without realizing the abuse in the manufacturing process, are not necessarily perpetrators or instigators of the whole situation. But when they are informed and they still choose to fund that particular paradigm and promote those labels, then yeah, they are complicit and they are part of the problem. So I'm speaking this example because it is much like naming patriarchal sex as a paradigm. It's far beyond looking for someone to blame. It's about bringing the entire situation to light so that those who are suffering within it can have less suffering because there are those who can afford to become aware of it and to start their individual process to dismantle their own participation in it. And that's what this self-inquiry and the collective inquiry of this whole project is inviting you to be part of. And when it comes to the patriarchal sex paradigm, in response to this shift in society of women now choosing that they, can make their own life decisions without being tied to a man financially, legally, some are blaming feminism for this breakdown in relationships and family because women now have legal rights and financial autonomy in some places. But some don't agree with that, and some courageous men realize that this current time of change is an opportunity to also free himself from a paradigm that didn't really work for him either. But the thing is, often men don't see the need to, say, define the patriarchal sex paradigm for what it is as readily as women because they've gotten used to benefiting from it more. Women are typically happier to see it and move on from it faster because they didn't really gain as much from it in the first place. And women have largely not questioned it either, mostly due to over internalizing it, but also haven't been able to because of survival fears. For example, women that have had no way to generate income, so have put up with things that they didn't really want, or fear of survival in the form of threats of physical violence and being actually scared about saying what they really want. All these things are real dynamics in people's relationships, whether it's a imagined fear or an actual fear that could have those consequences. Even though all of that is true, on a broader level, it is still a co-creation. The paradigm itself of patriarchal sex is a co-created one. And only now, when women are having the opportunity en masse to say, no, we've had enough of this, can it really be the time to bring something like this project forward? And I have to say, whenever I mention these things, that of course there are many types of men and many types of women and other gendered experiences. And huge, vast nuances in the actual lived experiences that we all come from. But the thing is, if we can acknowledge the typical paradigm that's been passed on for multiple generations, that of course not everyone identifies with and fits into exactly. But if you can acknowledge the typical paradigm, it's easier to then see the threads of where that may have continued into your own experiences of sex and intimacy, if you dare. And you may have noticed that there is a heteronormative focus in this project. And I want to take a moment to say that that's not about disregarding same sex relating. It's actually about acknowledging that embodied expressions of patriarchy are most likely to show up between men and women in particular. And more I can say about that is that women who are partnered with women already, oftentimes at least, are naturally going through a purging of the patriarchal sex paradigm in discovering how to be with each other. And yes, it can still play out between a woman and a woman or a man and a man. And it can even play out alone by yourself with how you approach your own body, your own energy. But the emphasis on the male female dynamic here is to firstly communicate about the patriarchal sex paradigm itself, which takes quite a bit of explanation, as you may be able to hear, and personal exploration through deep self inquiry. So, I would like to elaborate on what I said about patriarchal sex being a form of violence against women, because obviously I mean that word violence here in its wider meaning, including normalized exploitation of women's bodies and how male centric sex usually is. A very simple demonstration of that is how penetration is seen as the main event. Like that's the actual definition most people would have of sex. And foreplay, which is a really important part of how a woman's body really opens, and sometimes that can just keep going infinitely to a place that is extremely pleasurable for the woman, is minimized to being called foreplay, and in a lot of cases is just dropped as an irrelevant exercise. So sex in the way people have known it has been very male centric. And yes, this includes what happens inside of many committed relationships, not just talking about extreme situations. I'm personally here for the substance of this work and the research project, not for the likes. But if you want to see interesting and prominent speakers become part of this research, there are two things that you could do right now to help make that happen. First one is to follow the Tigress Path on Instagram or Spotify, and to leave a 5-star rating with a review if you can on Apple. These two things genuinely help so much to get this podcast and research on the radar of those who can help expand the conversation wider. And may we all be free from suffering. And so the more people deconstruct patriarchy and realize its limitations in general, the more the ways that we all embody it are going to come into question. And so I'm really just moving that process along a little by coming out with this project and encouraging everyone to explore what sex and intimacy could be like without that assumed patriarchal approach. The alternatives to it are so rich and rewarding that I've spent my whole life focusing on sharing it with people, as have others that I'm going to be inviting here on the podcast too. But those rich, rewarding results also take quite a bit of self-reflection and self-honesty and courage to question the conditioning that we've each been given. It's not about just learning techniques and being better or more expansive in sex. It actually is a whole different way of being within your own body. And there are incredible world-class teachers who've been teaching about, for example, tantric sexuality for decades already. And while the more the merrier in carrying this message, all that needs to be said to show people the way to a more connected, more expansive expression of intimacy, it's already been given. And yet, typically, most people see that as optional, as luxury, as something non-essential. And meanwhile, while I have this perception of, connected, expansive, mutually beneficial sex and intimacy, their default mode is probably patriarchal sex. Because people have not commonly been calling it that, they think it's just how it is, and they accept this slavery paradigm. By naming it as this, I hope to give another reason, like more incentive as to why one would explore beyond patriarchal sex as a natural evolution and not just as something to maybe consider when the kids leave home or something that other people over there do or just as like a style of sex, like it's just a technique or whatever reason for the maybe one day perception about it. This is why I'm speaking to this and naming it clear instead of just staying in the teaching space of the beyond. For a couple that genuinely care about each other, becoming aware of what patriarchal sex is and how it's really been affecting both of you and how to live beyond it is a healing process. It's therapeutic. It's what can have both people feel elevated, respected in ways that matter most to them. And it's what can keep your relationship and your family together. And yes, I have a lot more to say on all of this still, but maybe this is enough for now. And what I've named here is something that many teachers of expanded pleasure and sexuality kind of do already know, but not many are willing to say it due to the reactions that are likely to come. And so, in saying that, no, it doesn't feel easy to name that patriarchal sex. The way that most people have sex is a normalized form of violence against women in a time when I don't see anyone else openly saying that. But everyone, I can see further down humanity's timeline, and I invite you to look into that with me, where people are going to look back at this very time that we are in now and say, how was it possible that so many people endured that way of being for so long? How could women have been enduring slavery conditions on their sexuality for so long? How did that become so normalized that few dared to question it? Because if you really think about it, under the obvious degradation of society under patriarchy, where empathy, partnership, collaboration, and human flourishing as a priority do not get valued at all, and definitely not as much as control, personal gain, profit above all else, how could it not be a patriarchal sex paradigm of how most people are having sex under patriarchy? How could it not be called that? How could people have not already been seeing this all this time? So there is this time coming when people will look back and say, what the hell? And for you to be here now listening to this, it means you are part of that inevitable evolution in humanity. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to this, considering this, inquiring into this for yourself, and know that there is still much more to come in the episodes that are coming next. If you enjoyed listening to this episode, please do share it around on social media. And know that everyone is invited to be part of our research in the anonymous survey. Your contribution will help reveal the exact ways men and women can live beyond patriarchal sex and find greater harmony together. You can find the link to our survey and also details on the Tigress Path for Women via thetigresspath.com.